The biting coat of the steel handcuffs was a sensation I never thought I'd feel, especially not while standing on my own manicured lawn under the golden glow of the afternoon sun. I watched, paralyzed by a mix of terror and disbelief, as Officer Miller, a man who had nodded to me at the local grocery store just last week, forced my arms behind my back with a grunt of practiced aggression, his knee digging painfully into the small of my back. "Sir, I have the keys in my pocket. The deed is in the office upstairs. I built this porch," I shouted, but my voice felt thin and brittle against the backdrop of the quiet suburban street. The true horror, however, wasn't the badge or the gun or the neighbors peering through their blinds. It was my mother-in-law, Evelyn, standing behind the screen door of my home, clutching a silk handkerchief to her face and whispering to the 911 operator that a dangerous trespasser had forced his way into her daughter's house and was claiming to live there. She looked me right in the eye, her expression devoid of the grandmotherly warmth she usually performed, and in that split second, I realized this wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a calculated execution of my life as I knew it. 3 years ago, when Maya and I first pulled up to the dilapidated Victorian on the edge of the historic district, it looked more like a ghost story than a home. It was a ruin of graying wood, sagging gutters, and shattered windows. But as an architect, I didn't see the rot. I saw the bones. I saw a sanctuary. We poured every cent of my savings and every grueling hour of our weekends into that house. I remember the smell of fresh cedar and sweat, the way Maya would bring me cold lemonade while I spent 14 hours a day stripping 10 layers of lead paint off the original mahogany staircase. We were a team. I was the man who built things, the man who saw the hidden beauty in broken structures, and she was the light that filled them once they were whole. Our life in the new Maplewood, as the neighbors eventually called our renovation, was supposed to be our fortress. Every morning began with the rhythmic, comforting hiss of the espresso machine and the soft padding of Maya's feet on the heated Moroccan tile floors I'd installed with my own hands. We'd sit on the back deck, watching the silver fog lift off the valley, feeling like we had finally arrived. I was a black man who had designed 3 of the most prominent buildings in the city's new skyline. I felt I had earned my place in this zip code. I had paid for every nail, every beam, and every blade of grass. The house was in my name, a gift of security I wanted to provide for our future children. Then there was Evelyn. My wife's mother was a woman who spoke in sugar-coated barbs and carried herself with the rigid, brittle posture of someone who believed the world owed her an apology it could never afford. When Maya and I got married, Evelyn didn't scream or protest. She simply went quiet, a cold, clinical silence that suggested she was merely waiting for a mistake. She was the kind of woman who would compliment your shirt while mentioning she'd seen a similar one in a thrift store bin. She called me the help once at a high-end garden party, then laughed it off as a senior moment, despite being a sharp, calculated 55. Maya always defended her, claiming her mother was just old-fashioned and struggling to adjust since her father had passed away, leaving her with a mountain of debt and a social circle that had evaporated the moment the checks started bouncing. The house was always the bone of contention. To Evelyn, this wasn't just a building. It was an asset she felt entitled to. She had lost her own palatial estate to foreclosure a year prior, a humiliation she hid behind designer scarves and expensive leased cars she couldn't afford. When Maya suggested she come stay with us for a few months to get back on her feet, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air. I agreed because I loved my wife, and because I foolishly thought that by showing Evelyn the stability and luxury I'd built for her daughter, I could finally earn a sliver of her respect. I welcomed her into our guest suite with a bottle of her favorite vintage and a key to the front door. I didn't realize I was handing her the tools to dismantle my existence. The week leading up to the incident was filled with small, jagged moments that I should have seen as warnings. Evelyn would walk through the halls, running her manicured fingers along the wainscoting, commenting on how expensive the maintenance must be for a man of my background. She'd ask leading questions about the mortgage, about the exact location of the deed, and why Maya hadn't insisted on family protections in the paperwork. I ignored the red flags, dismissing them as the bitterness of a woman who had lost her own status. I didn't realize that while I was cooking her dinner and pouring her wine, she was mapping out the dimensions of my life, looking for the weakest point to drive a wedge. She wasn't just a guest, she was a surveyor, and she had decided that the only thing standing between her and the lifestyle she deserved was the man who had built the roof over her head. The atmosphere in the house shifted from a quiet, somewhat strained hospitality to a thick, suffocating tension that I could feel the moment I stepped through the front door. It wasn't anything overt at first, just the way the air seemed to still when I entered a room, or how the conversations between Maya and her mother would abruptly snap shut like a book. Evelyn had stopped asking me about my day. Instead, she spent her time pacing the hallways with a legal pad, jotting down notes and peering into the corners of rooms as if she were an inspector looking for flaws. "Is everything okay with you, Mom?" I asked Maya one evening. We were in our bedroom, the sanctuary I had designed with floor-to-ceiling windows to catch the moonlight. Maya was sitting on the edge of the bed, her shoulders hunched, staring at her phone. She didn't look up. "She's just stressed, Marcus," Maya whispered, her voice sounding thin, like a thread about to snap. "She lost everything, remember? Being in a house this nice, it reminds her of what she doesn't have. Just give her some grace." "I've given her grace for 3 months, Maya," I said, sitting beside her. I reached for her hand, but she pulled away to brush a stray hair from her face. The rejection was subtle, but it stung more than a slap. She started asking me where I keep the original architectural plans and the property tax receipts. She even asked if the house was properly insured in case of a sudden vacancy. It's weird. Maya finally looked at me, but her eyes were glassy, filled with a strange, flickering guilt I couldn't decipher. "She's just being a mother, Marcus. She wants to make sure I'm taken care of. Can't you just let it go?" The warning signs weren't just inside the house. A few days later, I was out front, trimming the boxwood hedges I'd planted the previous spring. A patrol car slowed down, the tires crunching softly on the asphalt. It was Officer Miller. He was a local guy, someone I'd seen at high school football games. He lowered his window, his elbow resting on the door, his eyes hidden behind dark aviators. "Everything all right here, Mr. Sterling?" he asked. The tone wasn't friendly. It was inquisitive, bordering on accusatory. "Just doing some yard work, Miller," I replied, forcing a smile. "Why? Did the bush break the law?" He didn't laugh. "We got a call. A report of a suspicious individual loitering on the property. Someone claimed you were trying to force entry into the side gate earlier." My heart did a slow, heavy thud against my ribs. "I live here, Miller. You know that. I've lived here for 3 years. I'm the one who pulled the permits for that gate." "I'm just doing my job," he said, his gaze lingering on my hands before he rolled up the window and drove off. I stood there, the shears heavy in my hand, a cold prickle of sweat breaking out on the back of my neck. Who would call the police on me? The neighbors all knew me. Or so I thought. The point of no return came on a Tuesday. Maya was at a mandatory team-building retreat 2 hours away, and Evelyn had claimed she was going to the city to see her lawyer about her bankruptcy filings. The house was finally quiet. I decided to use the rare solitude to catch up on some design work in my home office upstairs. As I walked past the guest suite Evelyn was occupying, I noticed the door was ajar. A stack of papers had fallen off the nightstand, scattered across the rug. My intention was purely helpful, to gather them before the draft from the window blew them further. But as I knelt to pick them up, a word in bold black ink caught my eye. Quitclaim deed. My breath hitched. I picked up the document. My name was at the top. My property address was listed, and there, at the bottom, was my signature. It was a masterpiece, the slight slant of the M, the way I always looped the S at the end. But I had never signed this. I had never transferred the title of my home to the Evelyn Vance Revocable Trust. My hands began to shake so violently the paper rattled. I looked at the date. It was notarized 3 days ago, by a notary I didn't recognize. Beneath that paper was another, a printout from a real estate portal. My house was listed as coming soon. The description didn't mention my name once. It spoke of a stunning family estate recently restored by the Vance family, looking for a discerning buyer who appreciates heritage. The room began to spin. A wave of nausea rolled over me, so potent I had to lean against the bed frame to keep from collapsing. This wasn't just a mother-in-law overstaying her welcome. This was a heist. My pulse was a deafening roar in my ears, a rhythmic thumping that felt like a hammer against my skull. I felt the world tilting on its axis, the floor beneath my feet, the floor I had sanded and stained until my knuckles bled, suddenly feeling like it belonged to a stranger. I fumbled for my phone, my fingers slick with cold sweat. I needed to call Maya. I needed her to tell me this was some sick joke, some misunderstanding her mother had cooked up in a moment of delusion. But as I scrolled to her name, I saw a notification on my laptop, which was synced to our shared home security system. The camera in the kitchen had been manually disabled 2 hours ago. And then I heard it, the heavy thud of the front door opening downstairs. "Officer, thank God you're here," I heard Evelyn's voice ring out, theatrical and shrill. "He's upstairs. I told him he had to leave, that the paperwork was finalized, but he became aggressive. I'm terrified for my daughter's safety. Please, you have to get this man out of my house." I stood at the top of the stairs, the forged deed clutched in my hand, as Officer Miller and another deputy stepped into my foyer, their hands resting ominously on their holsters. "Marcus Sterling," Miller shouted, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings I had designed to carry the sound of music, not threats. "Hands where I can see them, now!" The betrayal didn't just hurt, it felt like a physical amputation. I looked down at Evelyn, who was shrinking back into the shadows of the hallway, a look of triumphant malice gleaming in her eyes. I realized then that the treasure I had built wasn't a home, it was a target, and the person I loved most might have just handed her the bow. The click of the handcuffs was the loudest sound I'd ever heard. It echoed through the open concept foyer, a sharp, metallic finality that seemed to shatter the very air. Officer Miller didn't even look at the paper I was holding. He didn't look at my trembling hands. He only saw the threat Evelyn had invented. "Drop the paper and get on the ground, Sterling," Miller barked. I felt his hand wrap around my bicep, a grip like a vice, as he forced me down. My knees hit the hardwood, the hand-scraped oak I had spent a week perfecting, and the pain flared up my spine. "Miller, listen to me," I gasped, my face pressed against the floor. "That paper in my hand, it's a forgery. She's trying to steal my house. Look at the date, look at the signature." "Shut up," the second deputy growled, his boot heavy near my head. "You're trespassing on Mrs. Vance's property. She's got the title, she's got the deed, and she's got a restraining order being filed as we speak." "Restraining order?" I choked out. The floorboards felt cold against my cheek. "I've lived here for 3 years. She's been here 3 months." Evelyn stepped forward then, her silk robe billowing like the wings of a vulture. She leaned over, her face a mask of practiced tragedy, though her eyes were as hard as flint. "It's okay, officers," she whimpered, the crocodile tears finally welling up. He's having a breakdown. He's been obsessed with this house ever since my daughter bought it for us. He can't accept that he's just a guest here." "A guest?" I roared, trying to twist my head to look at her. "I paid for the foundation. I paid for the roof. I am the architect of this entire life, you parasite." "See?" Evelyn whispered to Miller, pointing a trembling finger at me. "The aggression, the delusions of grandeur. He actually thinks he built this. It's the mental instability I told you about on the phone." The front door swung open again, and for a heartbeat, My soul surged with hope. Maya stood there, her coat damp from the light rain, her face pale. Maya, I cried out, my voice breaking. Maya, tell them your mother is lying.
Tell them about the deed.
Maya froze. She looked at me, pinned to the floor of our home, and then she looked at her mother. Her eyes darted to the officers, then back to the floor. She didn't run to me. She didn't scream for them to stop. She just stood there, her hands twisting the strap of her purse until her knuckles turned white. Maya, I prompted, the hoop in my chest beginning to curdle into a cooled, heavy lump of lead. Honey, look at me. Tell them I own this house. There was a long, agonizing silence. The clock in the hallway ticked, a rhythmic, mocking sound. Maya finally spoke, her voice so low I could barely hear it. Marcus, maybe you should just go with them. Let's settle this quietly. The world stopped spinning. It just died. Settle this? I whispered. She's stealing our home, Maya. She forged my name on a quitclaim deed. You know I would never sign that. Tell them. Maya's eyes finally met mine, and what I saw there wasn't confusion or fear. It was a calculated, miserable resignation. Mom said if I didn't help her, she'd go to the board, she whispered. She said she has proof you padded the invoices on the city project. She said we'd both go to prison unless we gave her the house to settle her debts. What? I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. That's a lie. I've never touched a cent that wasn't mine. Maya, you know that. I don't know what to believe anymore, Maya suddenly shrieked, her composure breaking into jagged shards. She turned her back on me, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. She has the documents, Marcus. She showed me the bank transfers. Why would she lie about that? Evelyn stepped toward Maya, wrapping an arm around her daughter's shoulders, pulling her into a grotesque parody of a comforting embrace. She looked over Maya's head at me, and a slow, hideous smile spread across her lips. It was the smile of a predator that had finally cornered its prey. You see, officer, Evelyn said smoothly, even his own wife knows he's been creative with the finances. We just want him gone. No charges if he just leaves quietly and signs over the remaining interest. We don't want a scandal, do we, Maya? I'm not signing anything, I hissed, my voice vibrating with a rage so cold it felt like ice in my veins. And you're not just a thief, Evelyn. You're a demon. You've poisoned your own daughter's mind to cover your own bankruptcy. That's enough, Miller said, hauling me to my feet. He didn't lead me toward the door. He pushed me toward the kitchen. We're going to wait for the sergeant to arrive to witness the voluntary vacation of the premises. Mrs. Vance, do you have the other documents? Of course, Evelyn said, walking to the marble kitchen island. She pulled a manila folder from the drawer, my drawer, and laid it out. These are the records of the unauthorized transfers from our joint family account to his private offshore stash. I looked at the papers as Miller forced me to stand near them. They were sophisticated forgeries, using my letterhead, my firm stamp. She had been planning this for months. She hadn't just been a guest, she'd been an industrial spy in her own son-in-law's house. Wait, I said, my eyes narrowing as I spotted a detail on the bank transfer sheet. This account number, this isn't mine. Maya, look at this. This is the account your mother used for her boutique that went under 5 years ago. She's trying to frame me using her own old accounts. Evelyn's face didn't twitch. She simply sighed. He's hallucinating again, officer. It's so sad. Maya, dear, why don't you go upstairs? You shouldn't have to see him like this. Maya began to turn away, but I shouted her name with such force she flinched. Maya! If you walk up those stairs, there is no coming back. Look at the papers. Look at the woman holding them. She is stealing my life, and you are holding the door open for her." Maya stopped, her foot on the first step of the staircase I had built for her. She looked back, her face a mask of agony. For a second, I thought she'd snap out of it. I thought she'd see the monster standing in our kitchen. "I'm sorry, Marcus," she whispered. "She's my mother. She's all I have left." She ran up the stairs, the sound of her footsteps fading into the upper hallway. Evelyn turned back to me, her eyes gleaming with a terrifying triumph. She leaned in close, her breath smelling of expensive gin and mint. "You're out, Marcus," she whispered, so low the officers couldn't hear. "The house is already under contract. A cash buyer. We close in 72 hours. By the time you get a lawyer to look at this, the money will be in an account you can't touch, and Maya and I will be halfway to Europe. You're just a black man with a history of aggression and a documented financial fraud. Who do you think they're going to believe?" She straightened up, her voice returning to its shrill, performative pitch. "Officer, he's whispering threats at me. Please, get him out of here." As Miller began to drag me toward the door, my heart didn't just hurt, it hardened. The heat of my love for Maya, the pride I had for this house, it all condensed into a singular, frozen point of absolute clarity. I wasn't going to fight them with my hands anymore. I was going to let them think they'd won. Because while Evelyn was a master of theater, she had forgotten one thing. I was an architect. I knew how this house was built, and I knew exactly where the hidden supports were, both physical and digital. "Fine," I said, my voice suddenly calm, a dead, flat tone that made Miller pause. "I'll go. But Evelyn, you should have checked the cloud backups before you disabled the kitchen camera. I didn't just build the walls of this house. I built the nervous system." Evelyn's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, a tiny flicker of doubt crossing her eyes before she masked it with a sneer. "Empty threats from a desperate man. Get him out of my sight." As the squat car door slammed shut and I was driven away from the home I'd built with my own blood and sweat, I didn't cry. I watched the Victorian shrink in the rearview mirror, and I started counting. Not seconds, but assets. I had 72 hours to turn her closing into a funeral for her reputation, and I knew exactly who to call. The 4 hours I spent in the holding cell were the most clarifying hours of my life. The adrenaline that had made my hands shake was gone, replaced by a cold, crystalline stillness. I sat on the hard bench, staring at the concrete wall, and I didn't think about the betrayal. I didn't think about the humiliation of the handcuffs. I thought about the house. I thought about the way I had wired the smart home server into a fireproof floor safe beneath the pantry, a secondary dark system I'd installed because I was a man who planned for every contingency, even the ones I hoped would never happen. When my lawyer and oldest friend Elias finally walked into the interrogation room, he didn't say a word at first. He just looked at the bruise on my arm where Miller had gripped me and sighed. "I've seen the report, Marcus," Elias said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "Trespassing, resisting, and a mountain of financial fraud allegations. It looks bad. Evelyn has been busy." "Evelyn is an amateur," I said, and my own voice surprised me. It was flat, devoid of the heat I'd felt earlier. I felt like a man who had finally stepped out of a burning building and realized he was the one who held the extinguisher. "She thinks because she deleted the logs on the main console, the house is blind. She doesn't know about the black box in the pantry. It's been recording every conversation, every forged signature session, every whisper between her and that notary she hired." Elias leaned back, a predatory grin spreading across his face. "Tell me everything." For the next 2 days, we worked in a frenzy of silent, tactical precision. We didn't call Maya. We didn't warn Evelyn. I stayed at a hotel under an assumed name, watching the coming soon listing for my home move to pending. Evelyn was moving fast. She was desperate to liquidate the asset before the legal system could catch up. She had found a buyer, a development group that wanted the lot for a premium price. The closing was set for Friday at noon, right in the dining room I had built with my own hands. Friday morning was overcast, a grey shroud hanging over the valley. I arrived at the house 10 minutes before the scheduled closing. I wasn't alone. Elias was with me, along with a detective from the Major Crimes Division and two uniformed officers from a different precinct. We didn't use the front door. I used my master override code on the side gate, the one Officer Miller had accused me of forcing. As we entered the kitchen, I heard the sound of voices from the dining room. Evelyn was laughing, that high tinkling sound that always reminded me of breaking glass. "It's a bit bittersweet to sell the family estate," she was saying, her voice thick with fake sentiment. "But after my son-in-law's tragic legal troubles, Maya and I just need a fresh start. And you have all the necessary power of attorney documents for Mr. Sterling's remaining share?" A man's voice, the buyer's lawyer, asked. "Right here," Evelyn said. I could hear the rustle of paper, signed and notarized. I pushed open the double doors. The scene was a tableau of greed. Evelyn was seated at the head of the mahogany table, draped in a cream-colored cashmere wrap. Maya sat beside her, looking like a ghost, her eyes red and sunken. Two men in expensive suits sat opposite them, fountain pens at the ready. Evelyn's face went from triumphant to ghostly white in a heartbeat. The pen slipped from her fingers, clattering onto the wood. "Marcus? What are you? You're supposed to be in custody." "The thing about forged deeds, Evelyn," I said, walking slowly to the table, "is that they require a level of technical skill you simply don't possess." "Officer, get him out of here," Evelyn screamed, turning to the buyer's lawyer. "He's a criminal. He's trespassing." "Actually, Mrs. Vance," Detective Holloway said, stepping into the room and flashing his badge, "we're here because of a discrepancy in the black box server logs we retrieved from the pantry floor safe this morning." He pulled out a tablet and pressed play. The room went deathly silent. On the screen, the footage was crystal clear. It was from 3 weeks ago. Evelyn was sitting at this very table, a light box beneath a copy of my signature, carefully tracing it onto a stack of documents. She was talking to someone on the phone. "No, he won't notice," Evelyn's voice echoed from the tablet. "He's too busy being the great architect to notice the ground shifting. Once the deed is transferred to the trust, I'll call Miller. He's already primed to think Marcus is a threat. A little unstable black man narrative goes a long way in this neighborhood. We'll have the house sold and the money in the offshore account before Marcus even gets a court date." Maya let out a choked, horrific sound, a sob that seemed to tear through her chest. She looked at her mother as if she was seeing a stranger. "Mom," she whispered, you said he was stealing from us. You said you were saving me." Evelyn didn't look at her daughter. She was staring at the screen, her mouth working, but no sound coming out. The grandmotherly mask had completely disintegrated, leaving behind a hollow, bitter husk of a woman who had gambled her soul for a zip code. "Evelyn Vance," Detective Holloway said, stepping forward. "You're under arrest for first-degree forgery, grand larceny, and filing a false police report. You have the right to remain silent." As the officers moved to cuff her, Evelyn finally snapped. She lunged across the table at me, her nails raking the air. "It should have been mine," she shrieked, her voice a jagged, ugly thing. "You don't belong here. You never belonged in this house. This was supposed to be my legacy." "A legacy is something you build, Evelyn," I said, my voice quiet and steady as they hauled her away. "You just tried to steal the shade of a tree you never planted." Maya was shaking, her head in her hands. She looked up at me, her face wet with tears. "Marcus, oh God, Marcus, I'm so sorry. I should have known. I should have stood by you." I looked at her, the woman I had built a life for, the woman who had watched me be dragged away in chains and chose her mother's lies over the man she called her husband. The love I'd felt for her didn't turn to hate, it simply evaporated, leaving nothing but a vast, empty space. You had a choice, Maya, I said, and you chose the person who was destroying us. You didn't just fail me, you failed the home we built. I need you to leave. Now. Marcus, please. The house is mine, Maya. The deed you tried to liquidate is being voided by the court. I'll have your things sent to your mother's lawyer's office. The silence that followed was the heaviest I'd ever experienced. Maya stood up, her movements slow and mechanical, and walked out the front door without looking back. 6 months later, I sat on the back deck of the new Maplewood. The sun was setting, casting long purple shadows across the lawn. The house was quiet, but it wasn't a lonely silence. It was a peaceful one.
The legal battle had been grueling. Evelyn was serving a 5-year sentence, and Officer Miller had been suspended pending a civil rights investigation, but the dust had finally settled. I took a sip of my coffee, the warmth of the mug familiar in my hand. I looked at the porch, the stairs, the perfectly aligned eaves. I had lost a wife and gained a hard, bitter wisdom, but I was still standing on the foundation I had laid. I realized then that a house isn't just wood and stone, it's the truth of the man who built it. They can try to take the keys, they can try to rewrite the names on the paper, but they can never steal the sweat and the soul that lives in the grain of the wood. I was finally home, and this time, the only person I needed to welcome through the door was myself. Betrayal is a fire that either consumes you or tempers you into something unbreakable. I looked at my hands, steady, strong, and clean. I had built this life once, and if the world ever tried to take it again, I'd simply build it better. Because a man who knows how to create can never truly be left with nothing.